First encounter with a human warship leaves Galactic Armada reeling. The 3 colonial outposts on the Orion fringe went dark on a Tuesday morning, and nobody in the hegemony bothered to log the exact time. Not because the event was minor, it wasn't. 3 settlements, 40,000 people, reduced to smooth glass in under 4 minutes by the Apex-class Armada's vitrification array. The hegemony's after-action report would later note the efficiency as within acceptable parameters. The word acceptable, as though 40,000 people were a calibration result. High Provost Varkos did not watch from the main display. He sat in his command throne on the Apex bridge, fingers moving in a slow, deliberate pattern against the obsidian armrest. 1 tap for each outpost as the hololith confirmed the reduction. Tap, 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 an old habit from 31 prior campaigns, 1 tap per pacified world, so automatic by now that his senior advisors had long since stopped noticing it. He noticed 30 too soon, he thought. He reached for the comms interface without looking at it. The hololith filled with human faces, a diplomatic delegation assembled in what appeared to be a council chamber. They had been waiting. Clearly, the emergency channel had been live for some minutes. Several of them were still processing what their own sensors had told them. One delegate's mouth was open. Another had both hands flat on the table in front of her, pressing down as though the table might otherwise rise. Varkos looked at them the way a senior technician looks at a maintenance log, not with cruelty, not with pleasure, simply with an understanding that the matter at hand does not require his full attention. "You are but a footnote," he said, "a minor distraction in the annals of the true masters." He closed the channel before any human spoke. The hololith went blank. The bridge returned to its working hum. Navigation officers at their stations, the lattice-like glow of crystalline displays cycling through post-strike systems checks. One of his intelligence advisors, Subarchivant Drell, crossed the bridge floor and stopped at a respectful distance. "Any counter-transmission from the human confederacy?" Varkos asked, though he already knew the answer. "No, High Provost. The channel was open for 11 seconds after we closed it. No reply was filed." Varkos tapped his armrest once more. 32. What happened in those 11 seconds, and in the 22 years that came before them, is why I'm telling you this story. Stay close. 72 hours after the strike, Subarchivant Drell filed the formal threat assessment of the Human Confederacy. It was 4 pages long. The last 3 were mostly standard hegemony form language: species profile, resource index, territorial map. The first page was the one that mattered, and it read as follows. Human computational architecture is sequential and hardware-dependent. Their primary communications infrastructure relies on copper-core signal conduits and radio wave relay networks, a transmission paradigm the hegemony abandoned approximately 800 years prior to this assessment. There is no evidence of light lattice interface capability at any level of their technology. Their systems cannot communicate with, detect, or operate within the crystalline architecture that governs all hegemony command and control functions. Threat classification, preconvergent, probability of meaningful military response, negligible. "A species that still thinks in copper," Drell said aloud, reading from his own document as he filed it, "cannot dream in light." He sent the assessment and moved on to the next item on his slate. Across the sector, in the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged that the hegemony found entirely predictable. 3 neutral species filed requests to renegotiate their existing hegemony treaties, citing the strike on the Orion fringe as evidence that resistance was not viable. 2 more quietly withdrew their observer status applications to the Human Confederacy's diplomatic registry. The silence from Earth and its affiliated worlds was so total, so unbroken, that a hegemony strategic summary distributed to the Armada's senior officers described it simply as paralysis consistent with species encountering Apex-class deployment for the first time. No further action recommended. The galaxy had reached its verdict. The footnote had been written. What the galaxy did not see, because it was not looking at the right thing, was what happened inside a hardened facility buried in an asteroid belt 6 light-years from the nearest hegemony patrol route. At 3:47 on the morning after the strike, while Subarchivant Drell was still composing his 4-page assessment. The facility had no external beacon, no registered transponder. Its exterior was cold rock, sensor dark, indistinguishable from the 14,000 other rocks in the belt. Inside, the air smelled of recycled oxygen and machine oil and something faintly metallic, the tang of copper wiring running hot behind old panels. The lighting ran amber at this hour. Consoles lined the walls in 3 rows, most of them dark, a few showing slow pulse lines. A woman sat at the center console in the 2nd row. She had been there for 3 hours. She had a cup of something warm near her right elbow that she had not touched since it was set there. On the console before her was a single text interface, no graphics, no holo display, just a cursor blinking against a black screen. Chief Architect Marin Solis typed one character. The cursor moved, nothing else changed. No alarm sounded, no light shifted. The consoles around her stayed at their slow pulse rates, entirely indifferent. She closed the interface, picked up the cup for the first time, found it cold, and set it back down. Then she pulled a small notebook from the drawer to her left, the cover worn smooth at the corners from handling, and opened it to the current page. She wrote a date. Beneath the date she wrote 2 words, cycle initiated. She closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, and began her shift debrief. If anyone had been watching, which no one was because no one knew the facility existed, they would have seen nothing. That was, Solis had always thought, exactly the point. The Human Confederacy's public response to the destruction of the Orion Fringe outposts was filed through the standard diplomatic registry 12 days after the strike. It was a single paragraph. It noted the loss of life. It requested the return of the outpost's territorial designation to Human Confederacy registry. It made no threat, no demand, no declaration. In the hegemony's diplomatic archives, it was catalogued under a subject header that translated roughly as acknowledgement of terms, no further action required. The human silence held. And somewhere in the hegemony's own systems, in the substrate layer of a routine firmware update that had been issued to the Armada's navigation array 3 weeks before the strike, and which had been received without incident by every ship in the fleet, processed without error, confirmed as clean by every diagnostic tool the hegemony possessed, something was waiting. Not moving, not signaling, not drawing any power that any system would flag. Just waiting, one layer deeper than the last time, patient in the way that a structure is patient, the way a wall is patient, the way a house is patient when someone is still building it from the inside. Subarchivant Drell met with Varkos twice more in the month following the strike. The first meeting was a routine briefing, the sector's resource assessment, the logistics of processing the Orion Fringe sites, the timeline for formal territorial integration. The second meeting was brief, prompted by a question from one of the Armada's junior navigation officers who had noticed something slightly unusual in the latest system update log. The update had included a minor subroutine in the navigation array's base layer. Standard maintenance code, the diagnostic said, no anomaly detected. Drell brought it to Varkos' attention because that was his job. Varkos looked at the diagnostic report for approximately 4 seconds. Any deviation from nominal, he asked. None, High Provost, all systems confirmed clean. Varkos nodded and moved on to the next item. Drell filed the log and closed the meeting. Neither of them looked at the subroutine again. In the asteroid belt 6 light-years away, the cursor on Solis' black screen interface blinked twice at 2:30 and went still. She was asleep. A junior technician at the far end of the console row noted the blink in his shift log, confirmed it matched the expected cycle response, and wrote 2 words in his own notation, thread seated. 41 people were on duty at the substrate facility at that moment. 299 more were cycling through the rotation at various positions throughout the sector, undercover identities the hegemony had never thought to construct a detection protocol for because why would they? The threat assessment said pre-convergent. The assessment said negligible. The assessment was 3 pages of careful, well-reasoned certainty. It was going to be the most expensive document Drell ever wrote. 3 years before the Orion Fringe went dark, Marin Solis had stood in front of the Confederacy Strategic Command and told them the hegemony had one weakness. Not a military weakness, not a resource gap or a supply line vulnerability or an overextended frontier, something quieter than any of those. Their architecture, she said, is unified. She let the room hold that for a moment. 7 senior officers around a long table, most of them watching her with the particular patience of people who had heard a great many proposals and funded perhaps 1 in 10. Every Zalosian system, weapons, propulsion, life support, communications, navigation, runs on the same crystalline light lattice substrate. Every ship, every station, every installation across their entire operational theater. She set a single data card on the table. They built it that way on purpose. It gives them total system integration, perfect efficiency. Every update cycles across the entire fleet simultaneously because everything speaks the same language. Rear Admiral Foss at the far end of the table tapped his stylus against his notepad. You're describing a strength. I'm describing a throat, Solis said. 1 throat, and I'm asking for 20 years and 340 people to put our hand around it. The silence that followed was the kind that meant people were doing math. Foss set his stylus down. 20 years. At minimum, possibly more, there is no fast version of this. And you're proposing we do this without any offensive action in the interim. Total silence, Solis said. No fleet mobilization, no diplomatic escalation, nothing that reads as a threat because a species the hegemony believes is pre-convergent and non-threatening is a species they will continue issuing system updates to. The moment they classify us as adversarial, they go dark. We need them to keep talking to their own systems. We just need to be inside those systems when they do. The proposal was designated Silence Protocol. Authorization came through in 11 days. The budget was classified at the highest tier. The personnel roster was sealed. 340 people began disappearing quietly from their registered assignments. The mechanism was in the end almost simple, not easy, simple. The distinction mattered enormously to Solis, who had spent the 3 years between first hegemony contact and the proposal building out exactly how it would work, testing it on isolated Xylosian relay systems that human deep survey vessels had mapped at the edge of contact range. The hegemony's crystalline light lattice operated at a specific frequency range. Everything it could detect, everything it could scan for, everything its security diagnostics were built to flag, all of it lived within that range. It was the most sophisticated computing architecture any human analyst had ever seen. It could not see below its own floor. Physical relay signals, copper-core radio wave, the kind of transmission infrastructure the hegemony's assessment had dismissed as pre-convergent, operated at frequencies the light lattice literally did not have the receptors to detect, not because the hegemony had overlooked the frequency range, because they had evolved past it 8 centuries ago and had no reason to build sensors for a signal type their systems had stopped using before most of their current officers were born. The thing they mocked was the one thing they couldn't see. Every hegemony system update traveled through a physical relay network before it reached the fleet's light lattice systems, a legacy infrastructure kept in place for redundancy, the last remnant of an older architecture. Human operatives embedded at relay station positions using cover identities built over years of careful preparation intercepted those updates in transit. The interception took, on average, 90 seconds. The update was copied, the virus layer was threaded into its base substrate, 1 layer per cycle, patient as sediment, and the update was released. The hegemony received its update, clean, confirmed, nominal. 1 layer deeper. This happened across 22 years, a total of more than 200 times. The first operative to die inside hegemony space was a signals technician named Bex Oren. He had been on the substrate rotation for just under 3 years when his cover identity was flagged during a routine administrative crosscheck at a Xylosian logistics station, not because anyone suspected him, but because a clerical error in the station's personnel registry had produced a duplicate file number, and the automated system had queried both. The query resolved before anyone human reviewed it. Bex did not know the query had resolved. He took the precaution he had been trained to take, and the precaution was not enough. Solis wrote his name in the notebook at 3:40 on a morning that was otherwise unremarkable. She had received the signal 3 hours before, a coded absence, the kind that meant a rotation contact had missed its window. She waited the full 3 hours before writing anything, because that was the protocol, and protocol existed for a reason. The notebook was physical, copper ink on paper deliberately chosen. She had explained the reasoning once to a junior officer who had asked why they didn't keep the record digitally. Nothing that can be networked can be secured. The junior officer had nodded as though this was obvious. It was obvious. It was also the principal silence protocol ran on in every direction. Bex Oren, she wrote his name and closed the notebook. The program continued. Over the years that followed, 10 more names went into the notebook. Some died in ways that could not be known precisely, a missed window, a signal that simply stopped, the particular silence of someone who had gone too far into hegemony space to come back. A few died in ways Solis's network was able to reconstruct afterward. She wrote each name the same way, date, then the name, then nothing else. No cause, no note, no eulogy. There would be time for that later, or there wouldn't, and either way the work continued. 329 people completed their rotations, 11 did not. At the 40-month mark of the program, a hegemony engineering officer named Torvkale filed an internal query about a minor inefficiency in the Armada's propulsion update cycle. The update was taking, on average, 11 seconds longer to propagate than the baseline specification. Torvkale ran diagnostics. All systems confirmed nominal. He filed the inefficiency under acceptable tolerance variance and moved on. The 11 seconds were, of course, the 90 seconds of interception compressed by the mirror protocol Solis's team had refined over the previous 4 years. The compression worked. The query was the closest silence protocol came, in its first decade, to detection. Solis read the report. Her team maintained a ghost access to non-classified hegemony internal communications as a detection monitoring function, and noted it in her own log with a single line, Torvkale propulsion query, confirmed closed, compression protocol holding. Then she called her lead technical officer and said quietly, shave another 2 seconds off the mirror cycle, I want to be at 9. The lead technical officer said they could do 8. Solis said 8 was fine. The dramatic irony crystallized 16 years into the program, when the hegemony issued what its own engineering core designated as a landmark update, a full substrate layer rewrite of the light lattice architecture, designed to increase processing speed across all systems by approximately 30%. It was the largest single update the hegemony had ever issued. It touched every layer of every system on every ship simultaneously. The update cycle took 6 days to propagate fleet-wide. For 6 days, Silence Protocol's threading team worked in rotating shifts around the clock at the substrate facility. The amber light stayed on. The consoles ran hot. Solis did not sleep more than a few hours at a stretch for the full 6 days. At the end of it, the virus, which had been growing for 16 years at a rate of 1 layer per update cycle, had advanced so deep into the new substrate architecture that it was, functionally, part of the architecture. Not attached to it, not hidden inside it, part of it. The hegemony's landmark update had done most of the work for them. The engineering core filed its after-action report, full substrate rewrite complete, all systems nominal, processing speed increase confirmed at 31.4%, no anomalies detected. Solis read the report that same night. She sat at her console for a long time without typing anything. Then she opened the notebook, not the one with the names, a different notebook, this one for operational notes, and wrote 3 words, "We are home." She closed both notebooks, drank what remained of something cold in a cup near her elbow, and went to find somewhere to sleep. In the hegemony's operational theater, at approximately the same period, Subarchivant Drell filed his second quarterly assessment of the Human Confederacy's strategic posture. The summary section was unchanged from his first assessment, and from the assessment before that, no fleet mobilization observed, no diplomatic escalation, no evidence of advanced weapons development, classification pre-convergent, probability of meaningful military response negligible. Varkos received the summary during a briefing on a different matter entirely. He did not read past the first line. The Armada turned its attention to the adjacent sector, where a species of moderate technological capability had been resisting hegemony integration for almost a decade. Varkos spent the next 2 years focused on that. The Armada's systems continued receiving updates on their regular cycle. Every update confirmed nominal, every diagnostic read clean. By the time Varkos returned his attention to the Human Confederacy, prompted by a resource survey that had flagged the Orion fringe outposts as economically significant, the substrate had been running for 22 years. The program was not still growing, it had finished growing. It was ready. The Armada moved toward the Orion fringe. Marin Solis sat at her console in the amberlit room 6 light-years away and did not move. She had a notebook open in front of her, the operational one, and on the current page she had written 1 word a month ago and had not written anything since. The word was waiting. The Armada came out of transit at full deployment. Every weapon charged, every system live, the conquest count flags cycling on the Apex's hull display, 31 species, the number ticking through its sequence like a clock that had never run down. Varkos watched the sector resolve on his main hololith and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has never been wrong about a thing that mattered. His navigation officer confirmed position. His weapons officer confirmed full charge across all arrays. His intelligence officer, Drell, still at his post, still holding his 4-page assessment like a talisman, confirmed no human fleet activity, no mobilization, no response. As expected, Varkos said. He began tapping. 32, he thought, soon. He did not look at the physical relay conduits running along the underside of the bridge's auxiliary panel. Why would he? They were legacy infrastructure kept in place for redundancy, the last remnant of an architecture his species had not needed in 800 years. They were inert as far as any diagnostic was concerned. They had always been inert. They had always been full. 6 light-years away, in the amberlit room that smelled of copper wiring and machine oil, Admiral Ilara Vance sat down at the console across from Marin Solis. The 2 women looked at each other. Solis slid a single data card across the console surface. On it 1 word was printed, the same word she had written in her operational notebook a month before. Vance picked it up, she turned it over, she set it face down. Ready? Solis asked. Already, Vance said. It was a joke. the oldest joke between them going back to the third year of the program, when Vance had asked that question unironically and Solis had explained very patiently that already was not a word that applied to 22 years of work. They had repeated it every time since, so often that it had lost its shape and become simply a kind of handshake. Vance picked up her cup. It was coffee, lukewarm, the same cup she had been working through since 500. She drank what remained without tasting it. She set the cup down. She entered a single command. On the apex, the lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, out. The crystalline light lattice, every display, every navigation array, every weapons console, every comms panel across every ship in the entire Armada fell silent simultaneously. The hum of the quantum engines died, not with a sound, not with a shudder, but with an absence that was somehow louder than either. The artificial gravity stuttered once, briefly, enough to make the bridge crew stumble, enough to make Varkos's hand slip from the armrest mid-tap. The conquest count display had been showing 27. It stopped there, hung, went dark. Drell grabbed the edge of his console. His 4-page assessment slid off the surface and fell to the floor. He did not pick it up. Varkos's weapons officer tried his panel, nothing. His navigation officer tried his array, nothing. His communications officer opened his mouth and then closed it again, because there was nothing to say into a system that was no longer listening. Varkos said very quietly, "Report." Silence, the kind that answered. Then the screens came back, not to their previous displays, not to the weapons readouts or the navigation grids or the tactical overlays. Every screen across the bridge, and though Varkos did not know this yet, every screen across every ship in the Armada simultaneously, filled with warm white light. A face. A woman sitting at a console in a room that looked nothing like a warship's bridge. She had the quiet posture of someone reviewing a maintenance log. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She looked, if anything, like she was doing something she had done many times before and expected to do correctly. "High Provost Varkos," she said. Her voice came from every speaker on the apex simultaneously, from the bridge speakers, from the personnel deck intercoms, from the emergency broadcast channels that were supposed to be offline. "Your systems are currently under our administrative control." Varkos's hand found the manual override panel. His fingers moved across it by reflex, 31 conquests of reflex, muscle memory, built from a career of being the one who decided when things ended. The panel returned error codes. He tried again, error codes. He looked at the face on the screen. She had not changed her expression. "Your weapons are offline," she said. "Your life support is at 40%. A pause, the length of a breath, unhurried, just enough to keep you comfortable for the journey home." Varkos turned to Drell. Drell was staring at the secondary display panel on his left, or rather at what the secondary display was now showing. It was not a weapons readout, it was not a navigation grid, it was a schematic, a system map of the Apex's own architecture, rendered in the flat, clean lines of an administrative diagnostic tool, and overlaid across the light lattice substrate in a pattern that Drell did not immediately recognize. He recognized it on the second look. It was the light lattice substrate itself, but it was not the hegemony's rendering of it. The angles were different. The access layers were labeled in a notation he had never seen, clean, systematic, organized with the particular clarity of someone who had spent a very long time building something they intended to use. There were layers in the substrate he had not known existed. Many of them, running from the base of the architecture up through every system layer, threaded through the propulsion array and the weapon systems and the life support grid and the communications infrastructure like copper wire in a wall. Like the kind of infrastructure you could not see from the outside because it was behind everything, part of the structure, put there so long ago it had become the building. "Subarchivant," Varkos said, and his voice was the same as it always was, because he was the kind of man whose voice did not change. "Explain this." Drell picked up his 4-page assessment from the floor. He looked at the first line, threat classification, pre-convergent, probability of meaningful military response, negligible. He set the document back down without saying anything. Varkos looked at the schematic for a long time. The physical relay conduits along the underside of the auxiliary panel were visible in the schematic's lower layer. They were not shown as inert. They were shown as active as the base infrastructure through which the threading had traveled, the ghost nodes that had run invisible below the light lattice's detection floor for more than 2 decades, carrying signals the hegemony's systems could not scan for because they operated below the frequency range the light lattice had sensors for. The thing his intelligence division had called primitive. The thing they had dismissed as the infrastructure of a species that had not yet learned to think in light. That infrastructure was inside his ship, inside every ship in the Armada, not attached to the systems, not hidden alongside them. Part of them. How long, Varkos said. The face on the screen, Admiral Vance, though Varkos had not yet said the name and would not, had apparently anticipated the question. The first thread was placed 22 years ago, she said, 3 years after your people made first contact with ours. The last thread was placed during your landmark substrate rewrite, 16 months before you entered this sector. Your engineers improved the depth of access considerably. We were grateful for the efficiency. Drell made a sound that was not quite a word. Varkos did not look at him. He looked at the manual override panel. He had tried it twice. He tried it a third time slowly, pressing each input with deliberate care, because he was a man who did not accept results he had not personally verified. Error codes. He folded his hands in his lap. 30 years of campaigns, 31 species, the kind of certainty that came from never being wrong about a thing that mattered. He had looked at the human diplomatic delegation's faces on that hololith, the open mouth, the hands pressed flat on the table, and he had seen grief, paralysis, capitulation. He had closed the channel because their answer was not relevant. Their answer had been 22 years old. His fingers moved very slightly against his thigh. He caught them, stopped. He had been counting, he always counted, 31, 32. He did not know what number this was. On the bridge of every other ship in the Armada, the same schematic was displayed. The same voice was speaking through the same speakers. Navigation officers ran their hands across panels that returned nothing. Weapons officers tried sequences they had drilled for every engagement scenario the Hegemony War College had ever modeled. Engineers began running manual checks on systems that were, by every physical indicator, undamaged, and found them fully functional, responsive to every command except their own. The Armada was not broken, every hull was intact, every reactor was burning, every system was running within normal parameters. Obedient to someone else. One ship attempted to break formation, a reflex action from its navigation officer, who had initiated a manual thruster burn before the administrative lock extended to manual systems. The burn lasted 4 seconds before the lock reached the thruster array. The ship drifted slightly out of alignment, then corrected, not by its own crew. The correction came from the same source as everything else. On every ship, in every language the Armada's crew spoke, the same message was playing on the same loop through the same hijacked speakers. Your systems are under administrative control. Do not attempt manual override. You will not be harmed. Do not attempt manual override. The phrase was precise in the way that a guarantee is precise, not a threat, a description. Varkos sat with his hands in his lap for a long moment. The broadcast continued its loop through every speaker on the bridge. Your systems are under administrative control. Do not attempt manual override. You will not be harmed. His communications officer had stopped trying to interrupt it. His navigation officer had stopped touching his panel. His weapons officer had simply turned away from his console and was standing with his back to it, which was, Varkos thought distantly, the most honest assessment of the situation anyone on the bridge had managed. Drell stood near the dropped assessment. He had not picked it up again. Varkos looked at the face on the screen. The woman had not changed her expression. She was looking at something slightly to the left of the pickup, a console readout, probably the kind of thing you check when a process is running and you want to confirm it is running correctly. She was confirming it was running correctly. Subarchivant, Varkos said very quietly, are the life support readings accurate? Drell checked his handheld slate, one of the few pieces of equipment not integrated into the light lattice architecture, one of the few things still responding to his own inputs. He looked at the number. He said nothing for a moment. Yes, High Provost, he said finally, 40% across all decks, stable. Not falling, not threatening, stable at exactly the level she had named, not 1 point less. Varkos looked at the screen again. The woman was still not looking at him. We have the capability, she said, as though she had been waiting for the right moment to continue, to vent your reactors. We could also delete the command sequences of every ship in this Armada. Without those sequences, the Armada would drift. Your engineers would be unable to restore manual control within any time frame that would matter. She set something down on her console, a cup, from the sound of it, small, ordinary sound. We will do neither. Varkos waited. The Confederacy's terms are as follows. You will reverse your jump vectors. You will vacate this sector. You will not return. The administrative control currently running your systems will release upon confirmed transit. Your life support will restore to full capacity at the same moment. She looked at the pickup for the first time. We are not your masters, Provost, but we are certainly the ones who decide when you leave. She did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She looked at him the way you look at a problem you have already solved, not with satisfaction, not with contempt, but with the particular calm of someone whose work is done and who is simply waiting for the process to complete. Varkos held her gaze. He thought about the 3 Orion fringe outposts, the 4-minute reduction, the channel he had closed before any human could speak because their answer was not relevant. He thought about 40,000 people and a word acceptable in a field report. He thought about 22 years. And if we don't, he said. The woman's expression did not change. Then find out what happens if you don't, she said. She said it the same way she had said everything else, the same register, the same pace, the same total absence of performance. That was Varkos understood the answer, not a description of consequences, not a threat he could model or measure or build a doctrine response to, just the statement itself, delivered in a voice that had been calm for 22 years and appeared to have no intention of changing. His hand moved toward the override panel. He stopped. He put his hand back in his lap. Navigation, he said. Confirm the return vectors loaded to the system. His navigation officer turned back to his panel. He looked at the display. He said, confirmed, High Provost. Return vectors are loaded and set. The system is responding to jump sequence commands. To the return sequence commands, only those. Execute, Varkos said. The quantum engines came alive, not at full power, not with the full-throated burn of an armada moving to engagement, but at a quiet, dim, obedient burn. The apex turned, slowly, in the careful way of a very large thing that has been shown the door and is deciding not to argue about it. Across the Armada, 31 other ships followed. The conquest count flags on the hull display cycled once more and then went dark as the system realigned for return transit. The sector was quiet. Vance watched the Armada's return transit signatures resolve on her console and then close, one by one, as each ship entered jump. When the last one was gone, she was quiet for a moment. Solis at the console to her left was already writing in the operational notebook, not the one with the names, the other one. Did they attempt manual override? Solis asked without looking up. He tried it 3 times, Vance said. The last one was slow, I think he was checking. Good, Solis said. She finished writing. She closed the operational notebook and set it to one side. Then she opened the other notebook, the one with the cover worn smooth at the corners, the one that lived in the left-hand drawer of her console, the one with copper ink on paper. She opened it to the current page. 11 names, each written the same way, date, then the name, then nothing else. She looked at them for a moment, then she closed the notebook. She put it back in the drawer. She did not lock the drawer, she never locked it. There was nothing in it that needed to be hidden anymore. 14 months later, in the Hegemony's Strategic Doctrine Division, a junior archivist carried a sealed report to Archivant Seal Dho's desk at the start of the morning shift and set it on the corner without interrupting her. Seal Dho had been in the division for 11 years. She had filed more post-incident reviews than anyone currently on staff. She was known in the way that careful and precise people are known, for never using a word she didn't mean. She broke the seal on the report and read the cover summary. It was the full reconstruction of Silence Protocol, assembled from the ghost node evidence retrieved during the 14 months of post-incident engineering review. Her team had counted the threads in the relay network. They had traced the update cycles. They had mapped as precisely as the evidence allowed what the humans had built and when and how. She read the summary twice. Then she set it face down on her desk and looked at the far wall for a moment, the way you look at something when you need to fit it into a space that wasn't designed to hold it. The ghost nodes in the physical relay network outnumbered the Hegemony's total active fleet, not the Armada, the fleet, the whole fleet, every vessel in active service across all operational theaters. The humans had not prepared for one Armada, they had prepared for the concept of an Armada. There was no Xylosian ship or station or installation that did not contain at least partial Silence Protocol threads. The program was not a defensive measure. It was not a weapon in any sense the Hegemony's doctrine had a word for. It was infrastructure. The humans had moved into the walls. Seal Dho turned the report face up again. She began to write. The doctrine revision was 40 pages long. It revised the Hegemony's formal classification of the human confederacy from preconvergent footnote to substrate-level persistent presence. It addressed, in clinical and careful language, the failure of the BS-7 assessment framework as applied to species whose infrastructure operated below the light lattice detection floor. It recommended a full audit of every system update issued in the past 25 years, which the engineering division's preliminary response estimated would take the better part of a decade. The revision was distributed to the Supreme Council and, per standard protocol, to the administrative councils of all 31 absorbed species under hegemony governance. 3 of those species requested diplomatic contact with the Human Confederacy within the year. They filed the request through standard channels. They did not ask the hegemony for permission. CLDHO noted this in a follow-up addendum, filed 8 months after the main revision. Her note was 2 sentences. The second one she crossed out and rewrote 3 times before she was satisfied with it. The final version read, "They gave us 40% and called it comfort. They could have given us nothing. The gap between those 2 choices is the thing we failed to account for." The closing line of CLDHO's doctrine revision, the one that would be cited in strategic papers, quoted in military academies, and repeated in 3 languages by the diplomatic delegations of species that had spent decades watching the hegemony's conquest count climb, was not rhetorical. It was a finding, filed in the same flat tone as every other finding in the document, in the section headed Summary Assessment. It read, "Humanity does not fight for territory. Humanity moves into the walls. By the time you know they are there, they have already decided what temperature you live at." At the substrate facility, the amber lights had been turned off. The facility was running on standard white now, the kind of light that meant the work was done and what remained was ordinary. Most of the consoles were dark. A skeleton crew managed the monitoring functions, which were quieter now, not silent, because silence protocol remained in place in every hegemony system, maintained on its regular cycle, patient as it had ever been. The terms had been met, the Armada had vacated. Vance had kept her word exactly. No reactors vented, no command sequences deleted, life support restored to full capacity the moment the last ship entered transit. Not one thing more than what she had said, not one thing less. In the left-hand drawer of Marin Solis' console, the notebook sat closed. 11 names, each written the same way, date, then the name, then nothing else. No cause, no note. No explanation for the people who had gone in and not come back, whose families had been told deep survey assignment, whose names were not in any public record, who had no funerals logged anywhere in any system the hegemony or anyone else could search. Bex Orin and 10 others. The notebook sat in the drawer. The drawer sat in the dark.